If you were on an island and only had $2,000 to spend, would you pick up the newer and much upgraded APS-C FX30 or the older classic full-frame A7 III? As you let me know in the comment section below, I am going to present a compelling argument that may change your mind and make you edit your comment by the end of this video. I compared the FX30 to the much cheaper ZV-E10 and the much more expensive A7S III, but what about a camera that's in the similar price range, but very different when it comes to capabilities? Is the A7 III even a viable option for filmmakers nowadays? Well, to answer that question, I recently used the A7 III on an actual client shoot, on a gimbal, and for many wide shots. So I would say yes, it is absolutely a viable option. I've had the A7 III for many years. It started off as my A cam, then became my B cam, and I've used it on client shoots, interviews, A-roll, B-roll, music videos, for business promos, etc. But now that the FX30 is hitting the market, would I still suggest someone to go out and pick up the A7 III? We're going to talk about all the advantages and disadvantages between the FX30 and the A7 III, the differences and the similarities today on the Film Alliance. Yes, the A7 III is 8-bit and the FX30 is 10-bit, but there's a long-lasting argument between 8-bit and 10-bit, and we need to bring some context to that before you just coin the A7 III off as an 8-bit camera that can't shoot close to what the FX30 can. Yes, 10-bit will give you more flexibility when it comes to color grading, and you'll also get a lot more colors out of your camera. But as long as you expose properly and you know how to use the camera, you won't be able to tell that much of a difference. As long as you have some time to control your lighting, like in an interview setting, compared to run and gun. If you're doing run and gun, then the FX30 is going to be your go-to. But there have been a lot of award-winning productions that were shot on the A7 III, and as long as you know how to expose correctly and use the color profiles, then you really can achieve some amazing shots. The A7 III is full frame, so you will have better performance in low light compared to the APS-C FX30. But because the FX30 is APS-C, you'll have a bigger selection of lenses not only to choose from, but also cheaper lenses to buy as well. So while you won't have a lot more low light capabilities with the FX30 compared to the A7 III, you will have a lot more lenses to choose from that will help you get those low light shots, such as the Viltrox 13 f1.4. The FX30 is marketed as a cinema camera and the A7 III is marketed as a hybrid shooter. So just keep that in mind as we talk about the similarities and differences. Both are Sony E-mount, both have the same batteries, both have 5-axis in-body image stabilization, both have the same max shutter at 1/8000, and neither have built-in flash. And neither have built-in variable ND filters, something that I was really hoping for with the FX30, but I guess we'll just have to keep waiting. Both of them have 2 memory card slots, but the FX30 accepts SD UHS-2 CF Express Type A cards, and the A7 III accepts 1 UHS-1 and 1 UHS-2, but not CF Express Type A cards. But keep in mind, as you purchase either one of these two cameras, that you will have to budget for the memory cards themselves. For example, as of the time of recording this video, you can get 2 CF Express 160GB cards for $798 and a 64GB UHS-2 for the A7 III, which will run you between $80 and $100 depending on if there's a sale or not. Now, to give you some context, I have 2 256GB UHS-2 cards in my A7S III, and those last me probably about a half a day on a full day shoot. So you would need to buy a total of 4 CF Express cards if you wanted to do a full day shoot, or you would have to make some time, maybe at lunch, to offload all of your data and then format your SD cards and then put them back onto your FX30. And that's assuming that you're shooting in 422 10-bit, 4K, 2460, or somewhere in that range with the FX30, because that's what I shoot on the A7S III. And as far as the A7 III goes, you'll either have to buy 2 of those SD cards to last you an entire day, or you'll just have to make some time during lunch to offload the data so you can format your card and put it back in the camera. That has been my experience with 64GB and my A7 III. Because it doesn't shoot in 8-bit, it doesn't take that much data like the FX30. So with that being said, memory for the A7 III is definitely a lot cheaper than the FX30. Both cameras have HDMI out, but the FX30 has a full-size HDMI, and both have microphone and headphone ports for monitoring your audio. Both have LCD displays, which are 3 inches, but the FX30 display is definitely superior with 2.36 million dots, whereas the A7 III has 921,000. And the A7 III's display does not articulate. Both cameras have Wi-Fi and USB, but the FX30 has a Gen 2 USB, which is going to transfer your data a lot faster. And both have the same Exmor-R CMOS sensor, just different sizes. The FX30 is APS-C and A7 III is full frame. Now let's talk about the differences and start off with the most drastic one, frame rates and resolution. And this is one of the main reasons why I decided to pre-order the FX30. The FX30 can shoot in 4K up to 120, and the A7 III can shoot in 4K up to 30. If you want to shoot in 120 with the A7 III, then you're going to have to switch it over to 1080, and this is where you're going to see a massive difference between the FX30's 120 4K image and the A7 III's 120 1080 image. Not to mention the FX30 does shoot in 422 10-bit. But when you're in a run and gun situation, I would say that's where you're really going to see the big difference. If you're in a controlled lighting environment doing a headshot or an interview, you really won't see that much of a difference as long as you expose the A7 III correctly. When I first picked up the A7S III, which has pretty much the same innards as the FX30 minus the sensor, I saw a complete difference when it came to run and gun when I compared it to my A7 III footage. I was really blown away with the dynamic range and how it didn't blow out so many highlights, and I was able to bring a lot of that back in post. But when I was shooting in a controlled lighting environment, I didn't see that much of a difference between the A7 III and the A7S III. Like we said in the beginning, the FX30 was created to be more of a cinema line camera, whereas the A7 III was more of a hybrid shooter, so you're going to get a cooling fan with the FX30, whereas the A7 III is just going to give you passive cooling. Now, I've never had the A7 III overheat on me, but I've also never shot in direct sunlight for more than 20 or 30 minutes in 4K 24. Most of the time I would use it inside for headshot interviews, and if I was on a gimbal or something, I might shoot it in 1080-60. Now, I have gotten to the point where I've felt the physical heat coming off of the A7 III, and it made me a little bit nervous, but it's never overheated on me. Also, the FX30 being a cinema camera has 5 mounting points, so you can attach all types of different accessories to it, like monitors, lighting, microphones, whatever it is that your heart desires, but the A7 III does not, other than the quarter mount thread that's on the bottom and the hot shoe that's on the top. So you would actually have to buy a cage for the A7 III, which I did, and that'll give you a lot more mounting points if you want to try to build this out to be more of a cinema rig. But something that the A7 III does have that the FX30 doesn't have is an EVF, and I find this super helpful, especially if I'm shooting with a long lens or I'm trying to dial in my exposure and I'm outside and I can barely see the display. I find that the EVF on the A7 III was super helpful for me, not only for video but also photography. Of course, there is a price difference, but not much of a price difference when you compare the two cameras. Right now, the FX30 is selling for $1798, and the A7 III is selling for $1998. So for only a few $100 more, you can get a full-frame camera. The body weight of the FX30 with a memory card and battery comes out to 646 grams, and the A7 III comes out to 650. So there's virtually no difference in the weight as long as you are based out with the body, but most likely you're going to add accessories to the FX30. Now, they are different sizes. The FX30 is a little wider, less deep, and taller. This might be valuable information to you if you want to figure out how you're going to rig it out, whether you're going to throw it on a gimbal or just go handheld with it. When it comes to photography, both cameras are very similar in their megapixel. The FX30 has 26 megapixels and the A7 III has 24, which is super helpful for me because then I don't have to bring two cameras if I'm doing a video and photography shoot. I can just switch this thing over to photos and get some really nice, solid photos, as long as you have the proper glass on the camera. And it would be a lot easier to shoot photography with this camera than it would be with the FX30, although the FX30 wasn't made for photography, it was made for videos first. Now let's talk about autofocus. There are more focus points on the A7 III. The FX30 has 495 focus points, and the A7 III has 693. But as one of our brilliant viewers pointed out to me in my last video, less focus points on an APS-C camera doesn't necessarily mean worse autofocus, because the sensor size area is smaller. This will be something to take a better look at once we actually get our hands on the FX30. But one thing the FX30 does have that the A7 III does not is focus mapping, and this is just a way better way to dial in your focus rather than using focus peaking, which I've used for years. But focus mapping seems to be a way better way to nail your focus, especially if you're using a lower aperture. When it comes to low light performance, the A7 III will definitely outperform the FX30, mainly because it's a full frame camera compared to the APS-C sensor on the FX30. Now let's talk about picture profiles. The FX30 definitely has a better selection of picture profiles. It has all the main picture profiles that the A7 III has, and it has S-Cinetone and Sony EI. And Sony EI will just ensure that you're getting the most dynamic range out of your camera. The A7 III just has your basic S-Log, Cine 2s, and HLG. Like I said, the A7 III has been my main B cam since I've gotten the A7S III, and I'll generally use it on two occasions. The first is just as a B cam to the A7S III to make sure that my side shot is looking good and solid and crisp and clear. And the second is to throw a wide angle lens on this thing and then put it up on a gimbal and use it as my B-roll B cam. So maybe I'm out shooting some client work and then I'll just jump over to my other camera, which is my A7 III with a wide angle lens on it, and I'll get some exterior shots or interior shots to try to make the space look bigger. This way I don't have to take my A cam, my A7S III with maybe like the Tamron 28-75 lens on it, switch the lens, and then rebalance the gimbal every single time I want to get one of those wide shots. The main reason why I bought the FX30 is because I wanted to have the ability to shoot in 4K 60 on my B cam. So if I want to throw the wide angle lens on it and I want to shoot people moving around, or I want to shoot moving objects, I can have the ability to shoot in 4K 60 rather than just 4K 24. A lot of times I would try to just move really slowly with 4K 24 to give it a slow motion look, and that helped. But once there's moving objects in the frame or people moving, then you can clearly tell it's not in slow motion. I really wanted to get that slow motion look, and I didn't want to jump down to 1080 because then you can really see a quality difference, especially if your A cam and most of your footage is shot with something like the A7S III. So although I've utilized the heck out of the A7 III for pretty much everything, I will be retiring him to the camera bag. But then again, maybe I'll bring him along to be a C cam or just to get my photos. But if your budget is only $2,000 and you really want a hybrid video camera and photography camera, then I wouldn't say that the A7 III is something that you should just mark off your list and go for the FX30, because it does have an EVF and it's going to be great in low light. If I had to give a suggestion to you on which one of these two cameras to pick up, I would say go with the FX30, but that's me just assuming that you want to do more video work than photography and you really are trying to get into filmmaking. You can also count on the fact that the A7 III has been out for 4.5 years, so it's really a tried and true camera. Go look at the reviews. Almost every single one of them are 5-star because it's such a durable, long-lasting, classic camera. And I know this thing is going to go down in the history books as one of the best hybrid shooters at its time. Whereas the FX30 hasn't really been on the market that long, so it might be riddled with bugs that none of us can foresee and might go down as a flop. Samsung released a camera called the Galaxy NX, and it had an Android built in, and it seemed to be like a promising camera. But it was riddled with bugs, and Samsung quickly abandoned it. So who knows, that might happen. It's very unlikely, but it's something to consider in all of our speculations. The question I end with is, are you going to edit your comment that you left at the front of the video, or are you going to stand by it and stick to what you said you were going to do? I'm Joe with the Film Alliance, and until the next video, peace.